The first sign that my daughter-in-law had taken over my workshop wasn't the new lock on the front door. It was the contractor invoice sitting in my mailbox. $27,400. Plumbing, a second bathroom, a commercial sink, and something listed as a bridal preparation suite. The work address was the brick workshop I had built with my son, my dead son. I was 66 years old, a master carpenter, and I knew every wall joist, beam, and nail in that building because Mark and I had spent 12 years restoring it together. I called his widow Melissa. She went silent when I mentioned the invoice. Then she said something I will never forget. "Ray, we already talked about this." "No, we didn't." A pause. Then her voice softened in that careful way people use with children and old men. "You probably just don't remember." I looked down at the invoice, at the words Cole House Events printed beneath the address. I had never heard of Cole House Events, but apparently, according to my own family, I owned it. If you've ever had someone use your age to make you question something, you know for certain you'll understand why I didn't start shouting. I grabbed my keys instead, and I drove to the workshop. My name is Raymond Cole. Most people call me Ray. For 41 years, I made my living building things that were supposed to outlast the people who paid for them. Homes, libraries, restaurant interiors, church staircases, the kind of work where being off by half an inch on Monday could become a $10,000 problem by Friday. I wasn't famous. I wasn't rich. But in our part of Ohio, if you mentioned Cole Finish Carpentry to an older contractor, there was a decent chance he knew the name. My father had taught me to use a hand plane. I taught my son Mark, and when Mark turned 26, the two of us bought an abandoned brick carriage house behind an old feed store at the edge of town. The roof leaked. Half the windows were boarded. There were raccoon tracks across the second floor. Mark stood in the middle of it, looked around and said, "Perfect." That was Mark. He could see the finished thing before anyone else saw past the mess. We spent years turning that building into our workshop. There were 2 long assembly tables downstairs, a finishing room in the back, tool storage along the west wall. Upstairs was a drafting area, a small office, and enough open space for training. The original roof was supported by heavy timber trusses. When we repaired them, I made Mark climb down twice because I didn't like the way he had reinforced one joint. He complained for a week. Then, 5 years later, during a heavy snow, he admitted I'd been right. I never let him forget that. After Mark married Melissa, she became part of our routines. She brought sandwiches on Saturdays. She handled invoices when Mark got busy. When their son Caleb was born, we built a wooden cradle in the workshop. From walnut Mark had been saving for something special. Caleb slept in that thing for 6 months. Later, when he was old enough to walk, Mark would bring him into the shop wearing tiny plastic safety glasses that covered half his face. There's a photograph on my refrigerator of 3 generations of Cole men standing in front of the same workbench. I'm holding a hammer. Mark is laughing. Caleb is maybe 4 years old and looks furious because we wouldn't let him operate the table saw. That photograph became more important after Mark died. I was 38, no warning, no long illness. He collapsed in the parking lot outside a hardware supplier after an undiagnosed heart problem. By the time I reached the hospital, he was gone. I remember almost nothing about the first week afterward. I remember Melissa screaming when the doctor spoke to her. I remember Caleb sitting on a plastic chair with his knees pulled against his chest. I was 11. I remember walking into the workshop 2 days later and seeing Mark's coffee cup beside a stack of trim samples. I didn't touch it for 8 months. Melissa and I became closer after that. Or at least I thought we did. Her parents lived several states away. My wife Joanne had died 3 years before Mark. So the 3 of us, Melissa, Caleb, and me, became our own strange, damaged little unit. Sunday dinners, school events, birthdays, Christmas morning. I helped Melissa replace her roof when insurance only covered part of it. She helped me clear Joanne's clothes out of the bedroom when I couldn't make myself do it. When Caleb needed braces, I covered what insurance didn't. When Melissa started dating again, I told her she didn't owe me an apology. Mark was gone. She was 40 years old. She deserved a life. The man she eventually became serious with was named Trevor Gaines. Trevor was 43 and had spent years working in hotel sales and event management. I was polished, good-looking, always dressed as if somebody might take his photograph. The first time we met, he shook my hand and said, "Melissa talks about you like you're her second father." I liked him. That's worth saying. People often retell a betrayal as though they hated the antagonist from the first second. I didn't. Trevor was good with Caleb. He asked before joining family traditions. I didn't try to replace Mark. And when Melissa asked whether it would bother me if Trevor attended Mark's memorial barbecue, I told her no. My mistake wasn't trusting them. Trust isn't a mistake. My mistake was believing trust meant I didn't need boundaries. After Mark died, I stopped taking large carpentry jobs. Instead, I turned more of the workshop over to a local nonprofit called Northside Skills Collective. They worked with teenagers who didn't always fit well into regular classrooms. Every Saturday morning, 12 or 15 kids came through those doors and learned basic carpentry, measuring, joinery, safe tool use, how to repair something instead of throwing it away. Mark had helped start the program. I used to say, a kid who could build a square box had proof that his hands could make something the world needed. Caleb started volunteering there when he turned 14. I wasn't especially talented at woodworking. I say that with love. His first shelf leaned so badly, Melissa put a plant on one end to make it look intentional. But he loved being there because his father had loved it. And I loved having him there for the same reason. The building belonged to me personally, not Melissa, not Mark's estate, not the old carpentry company, me. Mark and I had discussed eventually putting it into a trust, so Caleb could benefit from it as an adult, but we never finished that plan before he died. That unfinished conversation became one of the things I carried around as guilt. Melissa knew it. Over the years, I told her more than once, that place will help Caleb someday. I meant it. The mistake was assuming everyone meant the same thing when they said someday. When I pulled into the gravel lot after receiving that contractor invoice, the first thing I noticed was the sign. It stood where Northside Skills Collective usually placed a folding board advertising Saturday classes. White background, gold lettering, Cole House events. Underneath in smaller script, weddings, private dinners, celebrations. I sat in my truck staring at it. Then I noticed the flower boxes. We had never had flower boxes. There were 6 of them beneath the downstairs windows. I walked to the front door. My key didn't work. I tried again. Nothing. That was when I saw the keypad. Brand new. I called Melissa. No answer. I called Caleb. He answered on the 3rd ring. "Hey, Grandpa. Where are you?" "At home." "Do you know why the workshop locks were changed?" There was a pause. "Mom said you knew." "Knew what?" Another pause. Then he said quietly, "About the wedding place." I closed my eyes. "Caleb, don't worry about this. I just need to understand what's happening." "Are you mad?" "I'm confused. Mom said the shop wasn't making enough money." "The shop doesn't exist to make much money." "I know." That answer told me he had already tried saying the same thing. "Did she tell you anything else?" "She said Dad wanted the building to be for our family." That sentence hit exactly where it was intended to hit. Not Caleb's fault. Melissa had learned which words carried weight. I heard a vehicle behind me. Melissa's SUV pulled into the lot. Trevor was driving. They got out together. Melissa looked irritated rather than surprised. "Why are you calling Caleb about this?" I asked him why my key doesn't work. "We changed the locks because contractors need controlled access." "Contractors I didn't hire." Trevor stepped forward. "Ray, let's not do this in the parking lot. I'd love to do it inside my building." He glanced at Melissa, then entered a code. The door unlocked. The first thing I smelled was paint. The second thing I noticed was that Mark's workbench was gone. I stopped in the doorway. The 2 large assembly tables had been pushed against the wall. Our racks of lumber were gone. The tool cabinets had been moved. White fabric samples were draped across a folding table. There were brass candle holders on shelves where we used to keep clamps. A chandelier still wrapped in plastic sat in the middle of the floor. I pointed toward the empty section by the east wall. "Where's Mark's bench?" Melissa folded her arms. "It's safe." "Where?" "Storage." "What storage?" Trevor spoke. "We needed the floor open for events." I turned to him. "You moved my son's workbench out of my building." His jaw tightened. "Ray, we're trying to create something sustainable. There was already something here." "A charity woodworking class," Melissa said. The words came out sharper than I think she intended. I looked at her. She corrected herself. "I'm not saying the program isn't important. You sounded like you were. That building costs money. I pay the taxes. And you're not going to be doing that forever." There it was. Not quite the full truth, but close enough to see its shape. Trevor put his hands in his pockets. "Can we sit down?" "No." "Ray, who authorized $27,000 in plumbing?" Melissa sighed. "You did." I stared at her. "You'd have told me last spring to do whatever was necessary with the building." I remembered the conversation. A storm had damaged part of the roof. I had been in Tennessee helping an old friend recover after surgery. Melissa called because water was coming through near the office. I told her to hire the roofer we used before. "Do whatever you need to do," I had said, "to stop the leak, not to install a bridal bathroom. That was roof repair." "You didn't say that." I absolutely did. Trevor looked uncomfortable. Melissa didn't. "You also told us the building would be Caleb's someday." "Yes, so instead of letting it sit half empty." "It isn't half empty. Ray, Saturday classes don't pay the bills. They aren't supposed to." "Exactly." She rubbed her forehead. "This is what I mean. We have had this conversation." "No, you have had this conversation with Trevor." Her face changed. Then she said, "Maybe you should start writing things down more." That sentence was the moment I knew this wasn't only about money. She was building a version of me. An aging widower, forgetful, emotionally attached to a building, unable to adapt. If she said it often enough, maybe other people would start repeating it for her. I looked at Trevor. "Did she tell you I approved this?" He hesitated. "Melissa handles the property side." "That wasn't my question." "She said you were on board." I nodded. Then I walked toward the stairs. Melissa stepped in front of me. "Construction is active upstairs." "What construction?" Neither of them answered quickly enough. I moved around her. The second floor looked worse. The drafting tables were gone. A wall had been framed across one side. New electrical cable ran between studs. The old storage room had been stripped, and near the center of the space someone had removed part of one of the diagonal timber braces supporting the roof truss. I stopped. Every carpenter has a moment when his body notices something before his brain finishes explaining it. Mine happened there. The brace had been cut back to create more headroom near the future bridal suite. Trevor came up behind me. The contractor said it wasn't carrying much load. I turned very slowly. "Which contractor?" "Bishop Renovations." "Did a structural engineer approve this?" "I'd have to check." "No, you wouldn't." Trevor's face tightened. "You don't need to talk to me like I'm an idiot." "Then don't tell me somebody cut a timber truss because he thought it probably wasn't important." Melissa stepped between us. "Enough." I pointed at the cut brace. "Nobody uses this floor until that is evaluated." Trevor laughed once. "Ray, the building has been standing for 100 years. And it stayed standing because people didn't cut pieces out of it to make room for bridesmaids." Melissa said, "You're overreacting." "No, I'm reacting exactly the amount this deserves." I went downstairs. Before leaving, I turned to Melissa. "I want the code to the door." "Ray, the code." She gave it to me. I entered it. Then I asked, "Where is Mark's bench?" "Trevor rented a storage unit. Send me the address tonight." She stared at me. "You're going to destroy this because you don't like change." "I haven't decided what I'm going to do." "You've already decided." "No." I looked at the new sign through the open doorway. "I'm finally asking what you decided without me." I left. My first instinct was to call everyone. The contractor, the city, the non-profit, a lawyer. Trevor's former employer if I could find him. That was anger. Anger likes movement because movement feels like control. Instead, I drove home. I opened a yellow legal pad, and I started writing. Building ownership, north side agreement, contractor invoice, door access, structural alteration, missing equipment, statements made by Melissa, statements made by Trevor, what Caleb had been told. That last line bothered me most. I did not want my grandson turned into a witness against his mother. I was 16. I had already lost his father. Whatever Melissa had done, I would not make Caleb responsible for exposing her. That became my first real decision. Protect Caleb from the fight. The next morning I called Elena Ruiz, executive director of Northside Skills Collective. Elena, when is the next workshop class? Silence. Ray. Yes. I thought you suspended the program. I did what? Another silence. Longer this time. Melissa emailed us 3 weeks ago. What did she say? That the workshop was transitioning to commercial use, and that you were stepping back. I sat down. Did she say why? Elena sounded uncomfortable. She said you were having trouble keeping up with the building. There it was. Did she say I asked her to handle it? Yes. Would you forward me the email? I can. Don't add commentary. Just forward what you received. The message arrived 5 minutes later. It was worse than I expected. Melissa had written that Ray's memory and energy have both become less reliable over the past year, and that the family had decided to reduce his responsibilities. The family. Apparently, I had been demoted by a committee nobody invited me to attend. The email also said the Northside program would pause with Ray's blessing. I read that line 6 times. Then I called Elena back. I never gave that blessing. I figured, why? Because you would have called me yourself. That mattered. Not because Elena was taking my side. Because years of consistent behavior had created its own record. I asked her about the nonprofits agreement. Northside had a written license to use the downstairs teaching area every Saturday through the end of the following summer. I had signed it. Melissa knew about it. The agreement didn't make Northside an owner or long-term tenant, but it proved something important. The building had not been sitting unused waiting for somebody to rescue it. There was an active program there. Melissa had simply pushed it aside. That was the first layer. The second came from the contractor. I called Bishop Renovations and asked for the project manager. A man named Aaron Bishop returned my call. He sounded nervous when I identified myself. Mr. Cole, I was actually told Melissa managed the property. She doesn't own it. Understood. Did she sign your contract? She signed as project manager for Cole House Events. Who did you believe Cole House Events belonged to? There was a pause. The family. That was a clever answer. Did you receive written authorization from the property owner? Another pause. I'd need to review the file. Please do. He called again an hour later. No, there was no authorization from me. There was an email from Melissa saying Ray has turned property decisions over to me. That was all. Aaron sounded embarrassed. I didn't threaten him. He had made an assumption he shouldn't have made, but he wasn't my family. I cared more about what had been done upstairs. Who approved cutting the truss brace? Our carpenter discussed it with Trevor. Engineer. We haven't had the engineering review yet. I closed my eyes. Stop work. I need direction from my client. I am the property owner. That changed the conversation. Aaron agreed to pause all work pending confirmation. Then he said something I hadn't expected. We also have a removal inventory. What's that? Items. Melissa asked us to clear from the work area. We photographed and listed most of it before moving it to storage. My grip tightened around the phone. Send me the inventory. Mark's bench was on it. So were 2 antique hand planes that belonged to my father. A drill press, 3 rolling tool cabinets, a set of carving tools, and an oak cabinet Mark built during his apprenticeship. Most were listed as storage. 3 items were listed as dispose per client. One was a heavy cast iron mortising machine. The second was a lumber rack. The third was my father's sharpening station. I called Melissa. What did you dispose of? She knew immediately what I meant. Old equipment. Whose equipment? Ray, you haven't used half that stuff in years. That's not an answer. Trevor sold a few things to offset renovation costs. The room went very quiet around me. You sold my tools to pay for renovations I didn't approve. They were sitting there. So is your car. Should I sell that if I need new gutters? Don't be ridiculous. I'm trying to understand your rule. She snapped. This is exactly why Trevor says talking to you is impossible. There it was. Trevor says, their private version of me was becoming a script. You told the nonprofit my memory was unreliable. Silence. Then I told them you were overwhelmed. No, you wrote the word memory. Because you are forgetting things. Name one. The conversation about the building. That conversation never happened. Yes, it did. When? Last spring. The roof leak. You said do whatever we needed. To keep rain out. That isn't what you said. I walked to my desk. Opened my phone. I had kept the text thread. Melissa Water coming in above office. Roofer can come tomorrow but needs approval. Me use Danny again if he's available. Melissa, he says may need new flashing plus some sheathing. Me do whatever you need to keep the place dry. I'll sort it when I get back. 3 lines later, me don't touch anything else until I'm home. I read that last message aloud. Melissa went silent. Then she said, that was a year ago. It's the conversation you just used as permission. You told me the place was for Caleb. Someday. Well, someday doesn't mean much if you refuse to plan. That was the first time I heard the anger underneath her justification. Not greed alone, resentment. I spent 5 years keeping things together after Mark died, she said. Do you know what that was like? Yes. No, you don't. Her voice cracked. You lost a son. I lost my husband. Caleb lost his father. And every time we walk into that workshop, everybody acts like Mark is still the owner of the room. I sat down. For the first time, I understood part of what she was doing. Not enough to excuse it, enough to recognize it. You wanted something that wasn't Mark's. I wanted something that could become ours. Then you should have built something of yours. We don't have the money to build a venue from scratch, so you used mine. You said it would help Caleb. It helps him now. With a woodworking class, with a place where his father is remembered honestly. She started crying. I hated that I still wanted to comfort her. That was the part of betrayal nobody prepares you for. You don't stop loving somebody the second they cross the line. Sometimes love is exactly what makes you stand there too long while they keep walking. Melissa ended the call by saying Trevor already has bookings. That was the third layer. Bookings. Deposits, dates, couples planning weddings at my building. Cole House Events had already taken money. I asked Aaron Bishop for no more information than he was authorized to share. Then I searched the business name through ordinary public records. Melissa and Trevor had formed the company 4 months earlier. That meant this wasn't a misunderstanding from last spring. It had been planned. Months of planning, vendor meetings, a website, photography, deposits, construction, all while Melissa came to Sunday dinner, all while Trevor asked me questions about old barnwood and lighting, all while Caleb spent Saturdays helping kids build birdhouses downstairs. I felt stupid. That bothered me more than I wanted to admit. My father used to say there are 2 kinds of pride, the pride that makes you do good work, and the pride that makes you pretend you were never fooled. I had been fooled. So I stopped protecting my pride and started protecting the building. My second decision was immediate. Northside's next 3 classes moved temporarily to a union training center owned by an old friend named Walt Brennan. I paid the transportation costs myself. I did not tell the teenagers there was a family dispute. They didn't need our mess. Then I sent Melissa and Trevor a written notice that they had no authority to enter new contracts involving my property. I revoked their management access. I told Bishop Renovations to secure the work and perform no further alteration. And because of the cut truss brace, I contacted the city building department. That part made me hesitate. Not because I was afraid of inspectors. I had worked with enough of them. But I knew what Melissa would say. Ray is using bureaucracy to punish us. So I kept my report simple. I am the property owner. A structural timber member was altered without my approval. I need the building evaluated before public occupancy. No accusations, no speeches, just the problem. The inspector assigned was a man named Douglas Grant. I knew his name but had never worked closely with him. That was actually a relief. I didn't want anyone doing me favors. Douglas scheduled an inspection for the following Thursday. I informed Melissa. She called within minutes. You reported us. I reported a cut structural brace. You could have let Trevor fix it. Trevor isn't a structural engineer. The contractor says it's fine. The contractor told me they haven't had an engineering review. Silence. Then we have our preview event Thursday. That was news to me. What preview event? A small open house. Vendors. A few potential clients. At a building under construction. The downstairs is finished enough. Cancel it. We can't. Why? Because people have schedules, Ray. Then tell them the property owner didn't authorize the event. Her voice hardened. You want us humiliated? No. I want people out of a building until someone confirms it's safe. You always do this. Do what? You make everything a safety issue so nobody can argue. I almost laughed. I'm a carpenter. Roof staying up is generally considered part of the job. Trevor called that evening. He tried a different approach. Ray, I think we got off on the wrong foot. You changed my locks. That was operational. You sold my equipment, some obsolete items. You removed the nonprofit. We intended to sponsor them later. You told vendors you had authority you didn't have. He sighed. Melissa believed she did. Did you? Loom pause. Mark wanted Caleb taken care of. I was tired of hearing my dead son used as a blank check. Did Mark ever tell you that? No. Then stop quoting him. Trevor's tone changed. This building could generate 6 figures a year. There it is. What? The sentence you should have started with. I'm trying to build something for your family. You're trying to build a business. Those things aren't mutually exclusive. No. But only one of them requires my permission. He stopped pretending after that. We have deposits. Return them. You don't understand hospitality contracts. You don't understand ownership. Melissa has invested money. Whose? Silence again. That question led to another uncomfortable discovery. Melissa had used part of the life insurance money Mark left her. Not Caleb's education account. Not money belonging to me. Her money. That complicated my feelings. She hadn't stolen all the renovation funds. She had risked tens of thousands of her own dollars because she genuinely believed this business would become her future. Trevor had invested some money too. They weren't cartoon villains trying to steal a free building. They had convinced themselves that the future promise I once made Caleb entitled them to control the present, that made them more believable and more dangerous. People do their worst damage when they believe the outcome is good enough to excuse the method. Caleb came to my house Tuesday evening. He stood in my kitchen wearing his school hoodie. Mom says you're shutting everything down. For now. Because of the beam. Partly. He looked angry. At her. I'm not answering that. I'm 16, Grandpa. I know. I'm not 5. I know that too. Then stop acting like I can't understand. I sat across from him. All right. He waited. Your mother and Trevor made plans for my property without permission. Some of those plans involved changing the building and moving things that belong to me. I'm dealing with that. Mom says Dad wanted me to have it. I did. So why does it matter? Because having something someday doesn't mean you own it today. He looked down. She said the event business would pay for college. That hurt. Not because I didn't want his college paid. Because I had already created an education account for him. Melissa knew that. Your college is not dependent on this business. His head lifted. What? There is money set aside. How much? Enough that this doesn't need to be your problem. His face changed. She told me we needed the workshop to make money. I can't explain why she told you that. Caleb rubbed the edge of the table. Do you hate Trevor? No. That surprised him. Do you hate Mom? No. Then what happens? I don't know yet. He stared at me. You always know. That was almost funny. No, I don't. Dad said you did. Your dad lied about me often. Caleb smiled slightly. I continued, I know how to build a staircase. I know how to repair a roof. I know how to tell when a board is twisted before I cut it. I leaned back. Family is harder. He looked toward the living room. Can I still go to the shop? Not until the building is cleared. What about Dad's bench? I'm getting it back. That became my third decision. Not the building. Not the money. The bench. I drove to the storage facility Wednesday morning with Aaron Bishop. The unit was full of workshop equipment. Mark's bench stood near the back beneath a moving blanket. I pulled the blanket away. There were still pencil marks on the edge from a cabinet Mark had built 14 years earlier. Underneath the bench, scratched into the wood, were the initials MC. Caleb had added his own CC beside them when he was 9. 3 generations. One piece of wood. I stood there longer than I should have. Aaron pretended not to notice. Then he said, Mr. Cole, there's something else. He showed me the contractor inventory. One photograph captured the upstairs before demolition. The diagonal brace was intact. Another photograph taken 4 days later showed it cut. The job notes said, remove obstruction per TG open bridal suite sightline. TG. Trevor Gaines. That mattered because Trevor had been telling Melissa the contractor made the decision. Now there was a record showing the instruction came from him. I asked Aaron to preserve his original project records for the city inspection. Nothing more. Thursday morning arrived. I reached the workshop at 9:30. The inspection was scheduled for 10. The parking lot was already full. Melissa had refused to cancel the preview event. A florist van sat near the side entrance. A caterer was unloading trays. 2 women were arranging white chairs. A photographer stood outside taking pictures of the brick facade. And across the front hung a new banner. Cole House Events, where memories begin. That line nearly made me laugh. Melissa saw me enter. She wore a cream dress and heels. Trevor wore a navy blazer. They looked like business owners. Caleb stood near the refreshment table in a button-down shirt. When he saw me, he gave me a small nod. Melissa approached immediately. Please don't make a scene. I'm here for the inspection. The inspector can inspect. Good. We can talk afterward. Good. She looked suspicious. She had expected anger. Maybe she had built her plan around it. An angry old man is easier to dismiss than an organized one. At 10:02, Douglas Grant entered with a tablet flashlight and folding ladder. Behind him was a structural engineer named Priya Shah, whom the city had asked to evaluate the altered timber. I had never met her. That mattered too. No favors, no old friendships, just people doing their jobs. Trevor intercepted them. I'm Trevor Gaines, project manager. Douglas looked at me. Property owner. I raised my hand. Raymond Cole. Trevor's jaw tightened. Douglas asked, who has authority to answer construction questions? Trevor said I do. I said for work he personally directed yes. Melissa glared at me. Douglas started downstairs. Most of the changes were cosmetic. Paint, fixtures, temporary partitions. Nothing dramatic. Then we went upstairs. Priya stood beneath the truss. She looked up. Nobody spoke for several seconds. Then she pointed. Who cut that brace? Trevor answered immediately. The contractor adjusted it. Aaron Bishop was standing near the stairs. Douglas had requested the contractor's presence. Aaron said, we cut it after receiving direction from Mr. Gaines. Trevor turned. That's not what we discussed. Aaron held up the project notes. We document field changes. Melissa looked at Trevor. What? It was blocking the opening. Priya stepped closer to the timber. How much was removed? Aaron answered. She took measurements, looked at the adjacent joint, then asked whether any engineer had reviewed the change beforehand. No. Trevor tried to recover. The roof has shown no movement. Priya looked at him. That does not establish the modification is acceptable. Douglas asked for the permit documents. Trevor produced a folder. Then Douglas asked the simplest question of the morning. Where is the owner authorization for commercial conversion? Trevor looked toward Melissa. Melissa looked toward me. We had verbal authorization, she said. Douglas didn't care about the family argument. Mr. Cole. No. Melissa's face flushed. Ray, I authorized emergency roof repair last year. Nothing more. She reached into her purse. I have his text. I knew exactly which one. She opened her phone and read, "Do whatever you need to do." Trevor looked almost relieved. I took out my own phone. "Read the rest." Melissa stopped. Douglas looked between us. "I read the complete message. Do whatever you need to keep the place dry. I'll sort it when I get back." Then the next message. "Don't touch anything else until I'm home." The room became quiet. Melissa said, "That was a different context." "Yes," I looked at her. "That's the point." Trevor stepped forward. "This is a family misunderstanding. Ray told Melissa for years that the property would be Caleb's. Douglas said that isn't relevant to today's inspection, but it was relevant to me, because that had always been their strongest defense. Mark wanted this. Caleb will inherit this, Ray said someday. They had taken every vague promise of future generosity and turned it into present authority. I looked toward Caleb. I looked miserable. I refused to drag him into it. So I answered Trevor myself. "Yes, I have said the workshop should help Caleb someday." Melissa opened her hands. "Exactly. I also said it would continue helping kids now." She frowned. I continued. "Northside Skills Collective has an active written agreement to use this building every Saturday through next summer." Trevor's face changed. Melissa knew about the agreement. I could tell Trevor did not. "You never told me that," he whispered to her. She ignored him. Douglas made a note. That agreement didn't magically cancel their business, but it destroyed another claim they had made, that the workshop had been abandoned and needed a new purpose. Then Priya climbed down from the ladder. "I can't approve public occupancy upstairs until the truss is temporarily supported and a repair design is completed." Trevor said, "Fine. We'll keep guests downstairs." Douglas shook his head. "Not today." Trevor stared at him. "Why?" "Because this conversion has not completed required review, and the property owner is disputing authorization." Melissa's voice rose. "We have couples coming." Douglas remained calm. "Then the event needs to end." A florist standing near the stairs slowly lowered the box she was carrying. The caterer stopped arranging glasses. One of the potential clients near the doorway whispered something to her fiancé. Melissa looked at me. "You did this." I shook my head. Trevor cut the brace. "I mean all of this. You scheduled an open house during an inspection I told you was happening. You knew what it would look like." "Yes, that was the truth." I knew. But I had also given her every opportunity to cancel. She had gambled that the inspector would treat the problem as paperwork. The building disagreed. Trevor turned toward Aaron Bishop. "This project isn't over." Aaron closed his folder. "My company won't continue without written owner authorization and engineering direction." That was one door closing. The florist asked Melissa quietly about her deposit. Then the caterer. Then one of the couples. The business that had seemed so polished 20 minutes earlier suddenly looked like what it was. A collection of promises tied to a building they did not control. Melissa's eyes filled with tears. "You're destroying Caleb's future." That was the line that finally made me angry. Not loud. Cold. I stepped closer. "Stop putting him between us. I did this for him." "No! You don't know what it costs to raise him. I have helped every year." "That doesn't mean you understand. You used his father's name, his grandfather's property, and his future inheritance to justify a business you wanted." "I wanted security." "Then say that." She cried harder. Mark left me alone. The room became still. Even Trevor looked at her. I lowered my voice. "I know." "No, you don't." "Yes, Melissa, I do. You got to keep this." She gestured around the workshop. "Every board, every tool, every stupid pencil mark. You walk in here and he's everywhere." Her voice broke. "I go home and he's nowhere." For the first time that morning, I forgot the inspector, the vendors, Trevor, the money. I saw the woman who had stood in a hospital hallway 5 years earlier screaming because my son was dead. I understood her grief, and I still couldn't let grief become permission. "I would have helped you build something," I said. She looked at me. I would have invested in something that was yours. I would have helped you find a building. You would have said no. Maybe. Exactly. But you were allowed to ask. She wiped her face. Trevor stepped beside her. We can fix this. I turned to him. Yes. His expression brightened. Repair the truss. Return my tools. Cancel every agreement involving this property. Remove the business name from the building. His face fell. That kills the company. It kills this location. We already spent money. That was your decision. Melissa whispered Mark wanted Caleb to have this place. I looked at the empty area where his bench had been, then at the decorations, then at my grandson standing near the wall. And I said the line I had been trying not to say all morning. An inheritance is what you leave a child. Melissa looked at me. You were spending his father's memory before I was even dead. Nobody answered. Douglas eventually asked everyone not involved in the inspection to leave. The open house ended before lunch. There was no applause, no dramatic arrest, no security guards escorting anyone away, just florists carrying arrangements back to vans, food being loaded into containers, potential clients leaving quietly, and Trevor removing a gold-lettered sign from the front lawn. That image stayed with me. Coal House Events, face down in the gravel. The aftermath took months. The truss repair cost nearly $9,000. Melissa paid half. Trevor paid the other half after Aaron's project notes established that he had personally directed the alteration. We handled the other disputes through attorneys and written agreements. Because once deposits and vendors were involved, handshakes were no longer enough. Nobody went to jail. Nobody lost a mansion. There was no magical courtroom victory. Coal House Events returned the deposits it could return immediately and negotiated repayment schedules for the rest. Trevor and Melissa's relationship did not survive. I was not happy about that. Caleb cared about Trevor. Whatever Trevor had done to me, he had been part of my grandson's life for nearly 3 years. But the business exposed problems between them that had started long before the workshop. Melissa later told me Trevor had pushed the idea harder than she wanted to admit. I believed her. I also told her that did not erase her choices. That was new for me. The old Ray would have heard an explanation and immediately started reducing the consequence. I had spent most of my adult life trying to repair things. Doors, furniture, staircases, family arguments. Sometimes repair becomes another way to avoid saying something is broken because somebody broke it. Mark's bench returned to the workshop before anything else. Caleb helped me move it. We placed it exactly where it had been. He ran his hand across the old pencil marks. Then he crouched and looked underneath. Dad's initials are still here, so are yours. He laughed. Mine looked terrible. You were 9. Dad let me use his knife. I didn't say your father had good judgment. That made him smile. Then he asked, is Mom allowed back? I leaned against the bench. Yes. He seemed surprised. You're not banning her? No. Why? Because she's your mother. She was Mark's wife. She's still family. He waited. But she doesn't get keys anymore. That made him laugh. I knew there was a but. Northside returned 6 weeks later. The first Saturday back, the downstairs was louder than I remembered. Saws. Teenagers arguing over measurements. Elena telling someone for the 4th time not to put a drink near the tools. Caleb stood beside a 13-year-old boy, showing him how to square a frame. The boy asked, how do you know it's straight? Caleb answered, measure the diagonals. I smiled. That was something Mark had taught him. Near the end of the morning, Melissa walked in. Every part of me tensed. She had not been inside since the inspection. Caleb saw her first. Mom, she held a cardboard box. I found these. Inside were some of Mark's old workshop notebooks that had been stored in her garage. She handed them to me. I thought they belonged here. I took the box. Thank you. She looked around. The decorations were gone. The white partitions were gone. The brass candle holders were gone. The lumber racks were back. Mark's bench stood where it belonged. I hated this place for a while, she said. I nodded. I know. No, I really hated it. She looked at Caleb. Because he loved being here. You loved being here. Mark loved being here. Her voice softened. I felt like I was the only person who couldn't stand walking through the door. That was the most honest thing she had said to me in months. You could have told me. I didn't know how. You still can. She nodded. Then she said, I'm sorry I told people you were forgetting things. That apology mattered more than the money, more than the locks, maybe even more than the tools. I looked at her. Why did you? Her answer came quickly. Because it made everything easier. That hurt, she continued. If you were just stubborn, people might ask why you were saying no. If I made it sound like you were confused, they stopped asking. There it was. The whole betrayal in one sentence. Not one lie. A method. Make the person resisting you seem unreliable, and suddenly you don't have to answer what they're saying. I nodded. Don't ever do that to me again. I won't. And don't do it to anybody else. She looked ashamed. I won't. We didn't hug. Real reconciliation doesn't always need a soundtrack. Sometimes it starts with two people standing 6 feet apart and finally saying the exact thing they did. A year has passed. The workshop is still mine. That matters. But I finally finished the planning, Mark, and I never completed. The property will eventually pass into a trust, benefiting Caleb with Northside guaranteed continued use for a defined period. Caleb knows that inheriting something someday does not give him the right to control it now. He joked that I had turned his future into homework. Good. He should understand what he inherits before he receives it. Melissa works for a medical conference company now. Event planning, ironically. She's good at it. She and I have Sunday dinner twice a month. Not every week. Some things change. We're warmer than we were after the inspection, but not as careless as we were before it. That may be healthier. Last month, Caleb started building a coffee table on Mark's bench. He chose walnut because that was his father's favorite. The first glue-up went badly. One joint slipped. The top twisted. Caleb stared at it like his life had ended. What do? I ran my hand across the edge. Take it apart. I spent 3 hours on this, so it'll take forever. Probably, he groaned. Then he asked, can't we just force it straight? I looked at him. No. Why? Because if something starts wrong, covering it up usually makes the next step worse. He stared at me. That sounds like one of your life lessons. It's a woodworking lesson. Same thing with you. Maybe he was right. We took the table apart, cleaned the joints, cut one new piece, started again. That afternoon, sunlight came through the old workshop windows and fell across 3 sets of initials beneath Mark's bench. My father's tools were back on the wall. Teenagers were laughing downstairs. And for once, Mark's memory didn't feel like something I needed to guard. It felt like something alive enough to share. I used to believe protecting family meant giving them room, forgiving quickly, keeping private things private, avoiding embarrassment, keeping everyone at the same table. Now I think protecting family sometimes means protecting the boundary that keeps love from becoming entitlement. Melissa was family. That didn't make my workshop hers. Trevor cared about Caleb. That didn't make my son's name his business asset. And Caleb may inherit the building someday. That doesn't mean he owns one brick of it today. Love can be generous without becoming permission. It took me 66 years to understand that. The workshop is still standing. The repaired brace is stronger than the piece that was cut away. And every Saturday morning, when I unlock the front door, I pass the small brass plaque Mark installed years ago beside the entrance. I barely noticed it before. It says, "Build it right even when nobody is watching." My son meant furniture. These days, I think he meant more than that. And if this story stayed with you, subscribe and tell me in the comments, would you have forgiven Melissa after what she did, or would changing the locks on your own building have ended the relationship forever?